All right, so you know how it is, right? This time of year comes around, and boom,
Yeah.
suddenly everything's green like a leprechaun threw up all over the place.
Huh. Yeah, I can't go anywhere without seeing shamrocks and people talking about parades.
Exactly. It's St. Patrick's Day. You can practically smell the Guinness in the air.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting to me? How different that picture in our heads that we all have about St. Patrick's Day,
Yeah.
how different that is depending on whether you're talking about Ireland or America.
Oh, absolutely. I've always been fascinated by that. Like, on the surface, it seems like such a simple, straightforward holiday, right? Everyone's Irish for a day.
Yeah.
But when you actually dig into it, there are some really big differences in how it's celebrated and what it means.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to do in this deep dive. We're going to peel back the layers on St. Patrick's Day, take a look at how it's evolved on both sides of the pond. We've got
Yeah.
some great sources to work with here, an article from the National Portrait Gallery all about St. Patrick's Day in the U.S., and then this really cool piece from history that goes deep on St. Patrick himself, the man, the myth, the legend.
Haha, right? You think you know a guy, and then you read his biography, and it's like, whoa, hold on. So, yeah, I think comparing these two sources is going to give us some really interesting insights into how this holiday has taken on such different lives in Ireland and America.
Hey, let's do it. Let's start with Ireland. You know, when I think about St. Patrick's Day in Ireland, what comes to mind is like, a more traditional, almost solemn kind of celebration. Is that accurate?
That's actually surprisingly spot on. The early celebrations in Ireland were actually quite reserved and very much rooted in religion. I mean, the whole focus was on St. Patrick himself, the guy who brought Christianity to Ireland back in the 5th century. It wasn't until much, much later that things started to shift towards the more, let's say, boisterous celebrations we associate with
Yeah.
St. Patrick's Day now.
Really? So for centuries, it was a pretty low-key religious holiday in Ireland. That's kind of wild considering what it's become, especially here in America.
Right. And speaking of America, things kicked off way earlier than you might think. The National Portrait Gallery actually mentions that Irish soldiers serving in the British Army were already holding St. Patrick's Day celebrations in America as early as 1762.
Wow. 1762? That's crazy early.
Mm.
So while Ireland was having these quiet religious observances, America already had parades going on. Talk about a difference in vibe.
It really is. It's like two completely different holidays almost. And, as more and more Irish people immigrated to America in the 19th and 20th centuries, the holiday just exploded.
Yeah.
It became this huge symbol of Irish pride and identity. That's when we start to see the shamrocks and leprechauns popping up everywhere and the parades becoming these massive spectacles. We even see the color green taking on this whole new meaning.
Okay, so let's talk about the green. I
Yeah.
mean, here in America, it's practically mandatory to wear green on St. Patrick's Day, right? You don't want to get pinched.
That's right. It's become so ingrained in the American celebration of the holiday. You can't escape it. Green beer, green clothes, green everything.
But in Ireland, green actually has a really powerful and sometimes kind of dark historical significance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It's so much more than just a fun, festive color. There was a time under British rule when wearing green was actually illegal. And it wasn't just some random rule, it was deeply tied to Irish nationalism and resistance to British authority.
Oh, wow. So wearing green was like a political statement back then.
Absolutely. The National Portrait Gallery talks about this really moving Irish ballad called The Wearing of the Green. It perfectly captures the sentiment of the time. The first verse goes, "Oh, Patty, dear, and did you hear the news that's going round? The shamrock is by law forbid to grow on Irish ground. No more St. Patrick's Day will keep his color can't be seen, for there's a cruel law again the wearing of the green."
That's heavy. It's a far cry from, green beer and leprechaun hats.
Totally. And the context of that song is so important. It was written in response to the Irish Rebellion of 1798. Green became the symbol of the Society of United Irishmen who were fighting for Irish independence. Figures like Napper Tandy, who's mentioned in the song, were key leaders in that movement. So green wasn't just a color, it represented rebellion and defiance against British oppression.
Wow, that really adds a whole new layer to how we think about green on St. Patrick's Day. It's a powerful reminder that the meaning of symbols can change so much over time and place.
Couldn't agree more. And it really highlights how history has shaped these celebrations in such different ways. It's like the American celebration took the color green and ran with it in this very celebratory, lighthearted direction, while in Ireland, it carried this really heavy weight of history and struggle.
Totally different vibes, for
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so let's move on to the main man himself, St. Patrick. We celebrate him every year, but who was he really? Did his background influence how the holiday evolved differently in Ireland and America?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of people might be surprised to learn that St. Patrick wasn't actually Irish.
Wait, seriously.
Yeah, seriously. He was born in Britain in the late 4th century. His family was Romanized Britons living in what is now England.
That is a surprise. I think a lot of people assume he was Irish born and bred.
It's a common misconception. And what's even more interesting is that his family wasn't particularly religious. His father was a Christian deacon, but history suggests that this might have been more of a social or civic role than a deep spiritual conviction, maybe even something to do with taxes.
So how did this British guy end up becoming the patron saint of Ireland?
That's where his story gets really wild. When he was just 16 years old, Irish raiders attacked his family's estate and kidnapped him. He was taken to Ireland and forced into slavery for 6 years, working as a shepherd.
That's a pretty rough start to your life.
No kidding.
Wow.
And it was during this time as a captive in Ireland that he turned to religion. He found solace in his faith and became a devout Christian. Some accounts suggest he actually had a dream or vision during this period where he felt called to minister to the Irish people.
So his time as a slave actually laid the groundwork for his future mission. That's quite a twist of fate.
It is. And after 6 long years, he managed to escape and made his way back home to Britain. But the story doesn't end there. He wrote about having a dream where he heard a voice he believed to be God telling him to leave Ireland.
That's intense. It sounds like something out of a movie.
Right. But then later on, he had another powerful experience, a vision of an angel urging him to return to Ireland this time as a missionary.
So he felt this pull to go back to the very place where he'd been held captive. That's a powerful calling.
It really is. And this time he dedicated himself to preparing for his mission. He underwent over 15 years of religious training before being ordained as a priest and finally sent back to Ireland. His mission was twofold: to minister to the existing Christian communities there and to convert those who hadn't yet embraced Christianity.
Hold on, so ministered to existing Christians. I always thought he brought Christianity to Ireland, like it didn't exist there before him.
Right, that's a common assumption. But it turns out there were already some Christians in Ireland before Patrick arrived, so his role was more about expanding the faith, strengthening it, and organizing it across the island.
So it's a more nuanced story than we typically hear. He wasn't starting from scratch.
Exactly. And what's also really cool is that because he had lived in Ireland as a young man and likely knew the language and some of the culture, he was really smart about how he approached spreading Christianity. He didn't try to completely erase existing beliefs and customs. Instead, he incorporated them into his teachings.
That's really interesting. It's like he understood the power of meeting people where they are.
Exactly. He was a master of cultural integration. History gives a couple of really great examples. He used bonfires to celebrate Easter, which would have resonated with the Irish tradition of using fire in their own rituals. And perhaps most famously, he superimposed the sun, which was a powerful symbol in Irish paganism, onto the Christian cross, creating the Celtic cross.
Wow, that's brilliant. It's like he took something familiar and gave it a new meaning, making Christianity more relatable and less foreign to the Irish people.
Exactly. It was a really savvy way to bridge the cultural divide. I think it speaks to his deep understanding of the Irish people and their traditions.
Yeah, that's so much more complex and interesting than the simplified stories we often hear.
Oh.
Okay, one last thing about St. Patrick. We know him as St. Patrick, but was he officially declared a saint by the church?
This is another interesting bit of trivia. The formal process of canonization as we know it today didn't really exist in the early church, so St. Patrick was never formally canonized by the Catholic Church. However, his impact on Ireland and the spread of Christianity was so immense that he was essentially proclaimed a saint by popular acclaim after his death.
So he became a saint through the sheer force of his legacy and the belief of the people. That's pretty powerful.
It really is, and I think it speaks to how deeply he was revered in Ireland. His story became so ingrained in Irish identity and the foundation of their faith that sainthood was inevitable even without an official declaration.
So bringing it all together, it makes sense that in Ireland, the focus of St. Patrick's Day would have been very much rooted in this religious figure and his actual historical role, which, as we've learned, is a lot more nuanced than the simplified version we often hear about.
Absolutely. It was about celebrating his life, his mission, and his lasting impact on Ireland. It was a day for solemn reflection and religious observance.
Whereas in America, as the Irish diaspora grew, the holiday took on a whole new meaning. It became less about St. Patrick himself and more about celebrating Irish identity and pride in a new land. The shamrocks, the leprechauns, the parades, the green, it all became a way for Irish Americans to connect with their heritage and to show their pride in being Irish.
That's a great way to put it. The American celebration became a much more outward expression of cultural identity. It was about embracing all things Irish and making their presence known in a new world. And, it's interesting to think about how some of the symbols that became central to the American celebration, like the color green, had such different meanings back in Ireland.
Right. It's like two completely different holidays that just happen to share the same name.
Hmm.
One deeply religious and rooted in the life of a historical figure, and the other this big, boisterous celebration of cultural heritage.
I love that you've summed it up perfectly. And I think it really makes you wonder why these two celebrations diverged so much. Maybe it was the experience of being immigrants, of wanting to hold on to their heritage even more fiercely in a new land. Maybe it was about creating a sense of community and belonging in a place where they were often seen as outsiders.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like they took this holiday that was already important to them and infused it with this new layer of meaning and significance. It became about more than just religion. It became about identity and resilience and pride.
And it's still evolving today.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how St. Patrick's Day continues to be reinterpreted and celebrated in different ways all over the world.
It just goes to show you that even something as seemingly simple as a holiday can have so many layers of meaning and history. It's a reminder to never take things at face value and to always dig a little deeper to uncover the richness and complexity beneath the surface.
Couldn't agree more. And who knows, maybe next year when we see all the green and shamrocks, we'll be able to appreciate them on a whole new level, understanding the historical and cultural weight they carry.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll even raise a glass to St. Patrick himself, the British guy who became the patron saint of Ireland, and whose legacy continues to inspire celebrations all over the world centuries later. Cheers to that.